Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. My name's Jim. I am your host. Thank you very much for following our channel and listening to our draft content. I want to give a shout out to everybody that's helping bring daily draft content to you on this channel. Josh, Jared, Bill, Brian, Parker, Randall, Brock, Jake, Dean, Devin, Newt, Jacob, Clint, David. These guys bring it every episode. We could not do daily draft content without the help of all of them. So let's get ready for this episode of Mrs. R Relevant, the Daily Draft Podcast. Thank you very much, and we look forward to talking to you in a few seconds. And here we are, guys. How you guys doing?
I'm doing good. Looking forward to this first iteration of our DNA for a quick rebuild episode.
Absolutely. Definitely looking forward to this one. For everybody that's currently watching, if you're not currently subscribed to this channel, like Jim had mentioned, make sure you subscribe. We've got all sorts of content, all sorts of fun things coming down the pike. This one, the Texans and Commanders rebuild, kind of talking about what the DNA is of a rebuild. Before we dive in, Jim, you kind of want to give a little background of what we're going to talk about here?
Sure. So a bunch of us put our heads together and we said, okay, what other things can we talk about with the draft? And seeing the Commanders and the Texans turn it around in a year kind of resonated with several of us. So, that's what Bill, Newt, and I are going to be sitting here talking about today. So as we kick this off, we don't necessarily know where the conversations are going to go. We each have a few notes. But I don't know the takes that they're going to have, and I don't know if they know the takes I'm going to have. So I'm looking forward to this one. Bill, I think you're kicking this one off.
Yeah, I'm going to kick this one off. I'm going to start with the Commanders. So obviously, coming into 2023, 2024, Commanders needed a complete and full teardown reset. The big thing when I look at a rebuild for an NFL team, there's 4 big points that you have to hit. You have to have some sort of organizational structure between values and ideals, and it's got to be a top-down structure from your owner to your GM to your director of player personnel to your head coach to the coordinators. Top-down structure. What do you want to be known for as a team? Once you've got that idea and that guideline and that framework in place, you then have to identify weaknesses and how you correct those weaknesses. And I like to akin it to a cap versus capital scenario. Is it a salary cap issue that we're having? Is it a lack of draft capital? Is it potentially both? Where is that weakness there? Once you've figured out the weakness, you've got to gather your resources. Does it mean moving on from players that are underperforming and restructuring contracts or outright cutting them? Does it mean moving those players for additional draft capital and attacking each weakness piece by piece by piece? You cannot attack every single weakness in a single run. NFL owners nowadays are pretty impatient, so it's very hard to get a 1-year rebuild, but it can be done. And the big thing is once you do it, you also have to sustain it, which is the third step, sustainability. Once you've got those pieces in place, you have to develop the future, building on your foundation through the draft, not building at the draft. So a conversation that you then have, is it a best player available versus a position of need, as well as building at the draft becomes problematic when your scouting department isn't aligned with your vision, as well as becomes problematic when you start missing on picks. Misses are relevant, but when you start missing on key franchise cornerstones, it becomes a problem. The big ones, those franchise cornerstones I just alluded to, quarterback, left tackle, edge. You've got to get your guy at quarterback, you got to protect your guy at quarterback, and you got to get after the opponent's quarterback. So that's kind of where I think a 1-year rebuild kind of comes into play. Some big kind of high-level oversights from the Commanders when I saw their one-year rebuild. The big thing, they identified quickly what they wanted to be known for. So Cliff Kingsbury is their offensive coordinator. They wanted to spread it out, open things up. Dan Quinn is their head coach. They brought in a new defense, a 3-4 defense versus the 4-3 they ran in the past. So now they've got their guys. They've got that organizational structure all the way up through Adam Peters and through ownership. So the first thing they do, they attack free agency. Some big deals they picked up Austin Eckler. So they identified Cliff Kingsbury and his offensive scheme. He loves pass catching running backs. So why not go get a guy who's been very proficient at it? And so far this season hasn't lit the world on fire, roughly 750 yards of total offense between rushing and receiving, but it is a low risk deal. Another key deal I want to make sure that we hit on with the Commanders, they signed Marcus Mariota as a veteran quarterback. That ties into sustainability of building through the draft, not building at the draft. You get your veteran guy, now you're not locked into a quarterback. You can say, we're going to take the best player available at the draft, whoever that may be. A couple of other key deals. Bobby Wagner was another one that was definitely overlooked. He ran a lot of 3-4 defensive schemes in Seattle. Granted, he's 34 years old. He's not going to see the full rebuild out, but he can be the leader of that defense, the father to the small children running around the locker room to help guide them through and help be almost a player's coach, essentially, as well. And there's some other key components that the Commanders picked up through free agency, guys like Dante Fowler for pass rusher depth and, Frankie Louvu, good linebacker signings. But another one, Tyler Biadasz is at center. Identify the weakness. The Commanders cycled centers in and out year over year because of injuries. They said enough is enough. We're going to attack this and put this to bed. So using free agency to start to basically wrap in your weaknesses. So then when you get to the draft, you can now build on that foundation you've laid. Obviously, flip the page to the Commanders draft. Second overall pick. They're not tied into anything because they have Marcus Mariota as a quarterback. Marcus Mariota, one of the best 32 quarterbacks in the league? No. But what I will tell you is if I have Marcus Mariota, I don't have to take a quarterback if I don't need one. In this case, Jaden Daniels is there. You can now say, hey, Marcus is the starter. Jaden, you now have to beat him out, which Jaden ended up doing. In addition to that, they also hit on Jaden Daniels from a draft selection perspective, which immediately expedites this rebuild very quickly. Some other, obviously, key components that they took a look at, adding depth at defensive line, adding depth in the cornerback room with guys like St. Just and Samer still. But that's the big thing, is building a foundation from free agency based on your head coaches and your coordinators. Once you've built that foundation, building on it through the draft, and that's why the Commanders have turned it around so quickly. So,
no, Bill, I think everything that you said there hits home perfectly. I think organizationally, what you talked about first, having that common vision is going to be something that you need to start the entire thing off. I think the Commanders especially were, I don't want to say like overly fortunate, but leading into this Dan Quinn era, losing Sweat and losing, Young to trades rather than just purely free agency. The writing's on the wall for both of those players with the state of the Commanders 2 years ago, last year. It just was not in the cards. And I think that they made the most out of that situation. So while it's a quick rebuild, there were definitely things that were put into place that really, really helped them to get the ball rolling with that. And I think if you look at that extra draft capital that they're able to pick up with the addition of those players, like you said, Johnny Newton, Mike Sanders still, those are going to be players that you might not have if you're not getting rid of Young, you're not getting rid of Sweat when you're able to. And you look at it now, even, one more to tack on Ben Sinnott, where they hit, in my opinion, on their first 4 draft picks. 2 of those 4 they don't even have if they don't take care of business and, make the tough decision early on to help themselves out in the future. So I think that kind of goes to some of the things that they look at when you're looking at creating that organizational structure. Start with a clean slate. And I'm going to talk about it a little bit when we get into Houston as well. But, you can look at almost any one of these quick rebuild DNA teams. You have to be willing to implement your structure, to implement your system, and to not be afraid to kind of break tradition. One of the other big things that the Commanders did early on was trading Dotson away. And I think it floored a lot of people where they were like, why are you trading away Dotson? You have McLaurin and then, Zach Ertz, who was a solid pickup. nonetheless, kind of another veteran presence that you talked about with Wagner, this time on the offensive side, but you don't have a ton of players for Jaden Daniels. But I think that's some of the things that you look at in the building when you take a look at Cliff Kingsbury, what he sees with Jaden Daniels. When you take a look at how this team wants to operate, they are not being torn. They're not trying to toe the line of, what's going to make NFL draft media happy, what's going to, continue to kind of like keep ties with maybe older regime or something like that. I think Jahan Dotson's a wonderful player. I really like him, but obviously it wasn't working out in the Commanders system, and they decided to make that move for him. And, look at now, you let the reason that you drafted Jaden Daniels because you think he's a stellar quarterback flourish, and you let that take over. And once again, they're making those positive moves. We're not talking about sustaining necessarily that DNA today, but it continues to kind of go back to that backbone. When you look at organizationally, how do you set that up? You have to be willing to make the decisions that fit you and might not necessarily be the best decisions or the most popular decisions. So I think just to kind of like harp on that point, especially first, we could talk about Jaden Daniels all day, and obviously like that's huge. You're not in this situation if you don't draft Jaden Daniels. Mariota was really nice as that backbone. But like having that mindset, I think is going to be really one of the big things to focus on with this team, especially.
Yeah. So I've got 5 points to make, but I think you two have hit on several of the points. And what I will say what the DNA is not. The DNA is not hire a coach, draft a quarterback, and win.
Yeah.
Right? Because we can point to several teams that aren't making this episode, such as the New England Patriots or the Chicago Bears, which did at least one or the other or both, new quarterback, new coach, and they're not competing. So I have 5 ingredients. One of the ingredients hasn't been mentioned yet. But I'll start with what's already been said. New head coach and org structure. So if you're a team that is looking for a quick rebuild, you're looking for somebody to come in and run the organization, whether that's Bill Belichick as your coach who runs the front office, or you're hiring a GM that's an alpha. You need an org structure. So that's one thing. Drafting a QB, it's part of the DNA. Quarterback, most important position in sports. It can turn, if you get the right quarterback, it can turn a team around quickly. The free agent signings. So, Bill, as you were going through the free agent signings, I loved how you kind of outlined the players. Okay. What the Commanders didn't do is reset the market with any free agent signing. There was no free agent signing that reset the market, but Austin Eckler, Bobby Wagner, Marcus Mariota, Zach Ertz, Dante Fowler, Frankie Louvu, Tyler Biadasz, Dante Fowler, Jeremy Chin, Cornelius Lucas. Those are names that most NFL fans will know. None of them reset the market when the Commanders signed them. So they signed good players. And the most important thing with a free agent signing is the player needs to, their performance needs to exceed the value of their contract. It's easiest to do that with rookies, but at minimum, if you're signing a lot of free agents, you need to make sure that you're not resetting the market, that you're actually getting value, which brings me to my next point. They gutted the roster. So do you guys know how many players were on the 2023 Commanders that are on the 2024 roster? Did either of you do that math?
Let me just do some counting quick, but looking at our lads, it's not a high number.
20.
4, 5. Geez, yeah, I got through about 7 in the offense. That's insane.
Yeah. So literally there's 30 new players on the roster. Okay. And I'm going to ask the same question when we get to the Texans, and you're going to find that the DNA is the same. I'm just saying. Okay. Here's the one that nobody ever mentioned. The quick rebuilds happened in a weak division. And I'm sorry to any Cowboys fans or Eagles fans or Giants fans that are listening to this podcast. But the reason that the Commanders could turn it around so quickly is because their division isn't really that strong.
Yep.
It would be much harder to turn it around in the AFC North, right? it would be much harder to turn around in the AFC East. And if you're in the AFC West and Kansas City's in your division, forget about it, right? So where you are in the division structure matters. And with that, I think I've hit my 5 points. So from the way that you guys
Jim, I want to kind
like,
of go off yours too.
Oh, go for that, Newt. I didn't hear you.
Yeah, so I really like what you said, especially about the point with free agents not resetting the market. You know, to the free agents that Bill brought up, the couple that I brought up, and what you said. You know, like running down the list, it's like B, C tier guys, but you got Colleen Farrell that's starting for you right now, and he's not a liability. Like, is he blowing the top off? Is he the first round pick that he was supposed to be? No, but you got him for a cap hit this year of $1.3 million. Like that's nothing. Like, you're not paying this guy anything. I'm sorry, $3 million, whatever. You're not paying this guy anything in terms of like where his projection was. Is he that player? No. But is he able to be a stellar addition and play, once again, I like how you said that, above what you needed him to be. Like, you're paying these guys like what is a very middling salary, probably what they deserve based on their play, but they're all overperforming. Zach Ertz, Bobby Wagner continues to defy time. Jeremy Chin and Frankie Louvu, solid signings that you're able to get that are plug-and-play players. They're not going to be players that are a liability. They're going to get the job done, and they open the door for you to kind of continue with this and not just be a one-and-done type team.
Yep, exactly. And piggybacking off of that, even when you spend money on a guy like Giannis, who was a 3-year, I believe it was 3-year, roughly $36 million, right around there. The average value is $10 million a year. So that's in the top 8 of centers. But you've identified a weakness and said, hey, this is a position we want to attack. And they didn't go out and spend it on a guy who's 33, 34 that probably won't see the end of that deal and probably regress. They spent it on a 27-year-old center who had produced up to that point. There were some injury concerns. Obviously, centers don't get paid as much as tackles and guards. So not only do you not reset the market like we've talked about, but if you have a position that you want to attack, you hold strong to what you say is, this is our limit. We're not going to pass it. If you want to pass it, you can go somewhere else that will pay you that money because we're going to stick with what we know.
Yeah, I like that. I go back to one of the things, and I know both you guys kind of like, commented on this today when I brought up positional value in the draft. But you look at all of those positions that they paid those middling tiers, those linebacker positions, tight end position. Obviously, Clean Farrell's an edge, but you're paying these positions where you can get these guys that can be in there and, once again, not reset the market, have value based on their age. And then you're able to open it up for the Terry McLaurin that you're going to have to continue to pay if you want to keep him on your roster. You're going to be able to open it up for, in the future, Jaden Daniels as he continues to be that face of your franchise, hopefully moving forward. And you're able to do the things wisely through free agency, kind of picking and choosing what positions you want to fill and giving yourself the ability to go out and get those premium positions.
Yeah, and I think from the contract standpoint and the free agent standpoint, I think a GM is going to be looked at to make, I'm going to say it's 2 different types of decisions. So one is like you're doing a quick rebuild. What free agents can I bring in that are tier 2, tier 3 that will play above their contract level? So that's one level of GM scouting. There's another one, and it has less to do with the rebuild and more to do with sustaining, but that's, do you extend the right players? Right? There's going to be plenty of GMs that we could, like, for example, and I'll shout out Miami. I think that they give extensions to the wrong players.
Yep.
Right? And I think Brandon Beane in Buffalo even may have regretted extending Stephon Diggs because all the dead cap Buffalo has this year is because they extended Diggs past his age 30 season, right? And that may not always be the smartest math. So you have to balance between keeping players happy, but you have to pick and choose who you extend, but that's more sustaining, and that's not really what this podcast is about. So going back to the DNA of a Commanders rebuild, I think a couple of positions that I would pay attention to would be offensive line, specifically your tackles, and the tight end. Because as we pivot to the Texans, we don't have to do that yet, but the Texans definitely set up a rookie quarterback with a good left tackle and a good tight end, which definitely helps, right? But I think even some of the positions that the Commanders addressed, right, because adding Zach Ertz for a rookie quarterback should not be underrated. Right.
No, the veteran presence there is huge.
Right. Yeah. Does Drake May have anybody to the level of Zach Ertz that he's throwing to? Right.
Look at last year. Look at Adam Thielen with Bryce Young. I mean, obviously not the season you wanted, but can you imagine what last year for Bryce Young would have been without Adam Thielen? It would have been something where, it would have blown up way earlier. Bryce Young he still has a chance out there. I'm once again rooting for the guy with all I can, but if Adam Thielen's not there, I have no idea what that rookie season even looks like.
Yep. That's a great point. Yeah, when you bring in a rookie quarterback, we would want to look at who is around that rookie. Obviously, like Caleb Williams, I think the consensus was he was walking into the best spot a number 1 overall pick has ever walked into. Right? But it still wasn't a quick rebuild, right? And I mean, obviously, you have the Packers in the way, right? And you have a few other good teams, I think, that you play like twice a year, right?
Right. And one other thing that's underrated too that we don't talk about is the head coach being involved in some of those decisions from a GM standpoint. Like Dante Fowler, for example, Dan Quinn recruited him to Florida, played with him in Atlanta, played with him in Dallas. Dan Quinn knew what Dante Fowler was, knew what his value was, and can take that back to the GM and say, hey, Adam Peters, this is what I think he's worth. This is what I can get out of him. And look at him so far this year. He's significantly outplayed his contract. So having that structure in place where the head coach rolls up to the GM, but also the head coach can go and say, hey, there's this guy here. I know what I can get out of him. Let's go get him. Help speed those things up.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so you guys want to pivot to the Texans?
Yeah, I don't know. Bill, do you got anything else that you want to add to the Commanders?
No, I think we hit everything pretty much on the Commanders. I look forward to seeing how they continue to push through the quick rebuild. I think not only is the quick rebuild important, but how to sustain it. Like we talked about, building through the draft, not building at it. So I'm very curious to see how they continue to pivot through the rest of this year. But I'm ready to dive into the Texans I think you're kicking us off for Houston.
Yeah, but before you kick that off, Nate, I do also want to say, I did find it funny as I was prepping the slide. We decided to do this podcast when the Commanders were 7-2, and then now they're 7-5. So this entire podcast could just go down like the Titanic if the Commanders don't win another game this year. But with that, Newt, go ahead and kick off the Texans.
I'm not gonna lie, Jim. I thought you were gonna do an ad read for some Bills scouting department. I was like, well, before I do that, let me tell you about.
Here we go.
Oh man, I was like, wow, this podcast is talk about a quick rebuild. We've got the DNA right here. No, so you can see the records on the screen right there. I had 3-13-1 to 10-7. It's like I don't have to elaborate as much because. Especially starting with what Bill had said, it is very much mirrored. I think one thing to really echo though, and even elaborate on a little bit more. I know I talked about setting the building up on a common, path and doing that through making decisions that aren't always easy. And I really like how Bill started his conversation with that. The Texans are in the same boat. D'Amico Ryans comes in, and I think one thing that. Looking at all of these teams, and I'm not going to get into the other ones, but, just to toss out like the Detroit Lions, the LA Rams, other teams, you have coaches that are coming in and you're picking the right coach. So when you're going through this, we talk about the quarterback. You talk about getting the right players in the draft. Those are all things that are obviously how your board falls, but you have 31 other teams that are disrupting that process. And I'm not saying that any team out there has a free reign over whatever coach they want to pick. But to that point, you have a lot of leverage to get the coach that you want in that building, depending on how bad you want them. Number one, what are you doing to set yourself up to be an attractive team? Obviously what's going on in Carolina is really, really hampering the ability for that organization to create that environment. I think that you have to have good things happening around you. I'm really happy, going back to the Commanders a little bit, that they were able to get past that, because there's a lot of bad things going on there before. But with the Houston Texans, you bring DeMeco Ryans in. This is – hi, Charlie. This is an organization – can you wave hi? Right. This is an organization that kind of went like ups and downs. Obviously, they're a newer franchise in the league. They've had things where they've been riding really high. They've kind of gone through the aches and pains. But they bring in DeMeco Ryans, and with that, they brought in a guy that he's a player's coach. Brilliant mind, great defensive coordinator. That's obviously how he got the opportunity. But he's a player's coach, one that's going to be someone that is going to attract high character, high talent players, and he's going to attract the right kind of personnel, and he's going to create the right environment. I mentioned Dan Campbell. I mentioned Sean McVay. Those are probably two things that come with them right away. You look at what Dan Quinn's doing out in Washington, it's the exact same thing. These are coaches that are going to elevate their rosters because of what they instill in the character of the team as a whole. Now you go back and you look, well, what do? They draft C.J. Stroud, the best quarterback in the draft last year, possibly the best quarterback in the draft over the last, 4 years, going back to Joe Burrow. What else do? They have a already unit that they can work with at offensive line. Is it perfect? No. They obviously have some holes within there that they need to figure out. But, man, when you have Laramie Tunsil playing left tackle for you, that already instills a ton of confidence in a player to be able to not have to constantly be playing out of fear and getting rid of the ball after 2 seconds. And then you have players like Nico Collins. Once again, how can you get a player to rise above? Obviously still on a rookie deal, so it's not like we're bringing in a free agent. But Nico Collins, the first 2 years of his deal, and Nico Collins last year, he's a completely different player. He's rising above that third-round pick. Tank Dell, third-round pick, was not expected to be as much of an impact player. Dalton Schultz rose above what he was. He was a fantastic tight end last year. Still doing a really, really good job this year. And then you look down the defensive line of things. Obviously, they make the splash. They go out and get Danielle Hunter to kind of continue that rebuild, and they're really looking to push the envelope and see what they can do. But also, once again, not building at the draft, but through the draft, they have players that have now stepped in. Jeff Okudah, great player they can get on a cheap deal that can kind of be that stopgap, very much like Marcus Mariota. But now you have Kamari Lassiter and Caden Bullock that have been able to step up and step in and really be great additions to your secondary, where you were able to grab what you thought was the best player available at that spot. I think both of those players don't have the same necessarily impact, or I shouldn't say that, but they have more of an impact, but it's not as if you were lost without them. You could have gone in a different direction because you had some other players kind of laying in back. And then I didn't mention Jalen Petrie and Derek Stingley Jr., who they grabbed early on. You're able to create that really solid secondary. You're able to create this defense that fits Brian's scheme, while also having the players on the offensive side of the ball that are, once again, continuing to rise above, as you guys have said time and time again.
Okay, so I came up with 2 new takes just listening to you, Newt. We missed one on the Commanders. Like, you guys made the point, but we didn't froth it to the top. So both teams made trades that spearheaded their rebuild, right? You guys were pointing out the trading of Sweat and Young. And that, those were what, second and third round picks, I think, that they got. I don't know. Right. Did they even get a day 2 pick for Young? I don't know.
I think it was a third. Or was it a fourth?
It might have been a fourth.
Yeah. So at minimum, it's a decent pick. So they were able to do that. And then as I was listening to you, Newt, I realized part of the reason that the Texans were able to get both Will Anderson and C.J. Stroud in the same draft is they had assets from the Deshaun Watson trade.
Yep.
Right?
Absolutely.
And so that does – so extra draft capital makes a difference. That was not something I pointed out with the Commanders, but as I was listening to Newt, I added that to my notes. And then I love hearing you guys say build at the draft and not through the draft. So let's go over some of the Texans free agent signings. Robert Woods, Case Keenum, Dalton Schultz, Devin Singletary, Corey Littleton, Denzel Perryman. Then they had a Shaq Mason trade and a Sheldon Rankins trade. So they're bringing in guys, but again, these are not guys that are resetting the market or who anybody would say is one of the top 5 players at their position in the league. They're bringing in guys that get it done, but not necessarily guys who are resetting the market at the top. I will point out again, the Texans are in what I believe is the weakest division in the league. Okay.
Yep.
So if we were to fast forward and say, who are we going to be talking about next year? The Colts and the Titans are probably at the top of the list for who can do a quick rebuild next year, right? If we're looking at the DNA can be there for both the Colts and the Titans. I do like pointing. I like the point that you made that, D'Amico Ryans is able to bring in the guys that can run his defense, because my opinion would be if you have a defense that is above the middle, so middle or better, it's going to keep you in games if your offense isn't clicking. So having a defense at least kind of be your median is something to fall back on. You don't need an elite defense, but you don't want to try to rebuild with a really good offense and a bad defense. A good team plays complementary football, offense, defense, special teams. So having that defense that's at least mid, I thought that was a really good point that you brought up, Dave.
Yeah,
the Texans gutted their roster as well. When I counted, one of the teams had 23 players carried over, one team had 22. Yeah. When I was looking at the rosters year over year. So both teams were either 30 players or 29 players that were replaced. Right. So to me, that was something that was in common. And then we've already pointed out the drafting a QB and the new head coach structure. But what do you think, Bill?
I think you guys have hit pretty much everything on the head. One of the things that we talked about with the Commanders, and we also saw it with the Texans, even though it wasn't necessary, they did sign Case Keenum as that bridge guy. So even though they take a rookie quarterback, we have all seen history's littered with rookie quarterbacks that go early that don't end well, right? And especially nowadays in the league where we've seen quarterbacks that have been drafted high and have been rushed into positions where they're not ready. Bryce Young, Anthony Richardson, Will Levis, so on and so forth down the line, right? So to take a guy and get a guy like Case Keenum, now Houston can say, hey, we're sitting there at number 2. If our guy falls to us, we'll take him. If someone else wants him, we don't have to worry about it. We can come back and get a guy later or get him next year. So that's a big thing that's often overlooked because, we look back, back in even the 2000s, right? When rookie quarterbacks would come out, how often would rookie quarterbacks start? Eli Manning, when he went to the Giants in 2004, he wasn't even the automatic starter. It was Kurt Warner, right? So thinking about that, nowadays, everybody's in a hurry to start the quarterback. Let's get the rookie out there. If he's not in a position to succeed because he's playing for a team that's picking in the top 5, not every quarterback's going to go to a Caleb Williams type of situation. You're going to go to a team that has offensive line issues, that doesn't have pass catchers, that doesn't have a running game. The defense is terrible. So let's throw this rookie into the fire and expect him to carry the offensive load and the entire team is an issue. So getting that bridge guy to say, okay, well, if we don't have a good team around him, let's put the bridge out there, the 6, 7, 8 year veteran who's been through these situations while we bring the rookie along and build around him and supplement him with talent, whether it be in next year's free agency or next year's draft. So that's the things that I would see. Yeah.
I love that point. The number of rookie quarterbacks that come out and start, it's ridiculously high. Just like you said, like you look at 20 years ago, you look at now. Last year, should we have seen Anthony Richardson start right away? Absolutely not. I think that was a scouting report. Every single person talks about him. He is this ball of raw talent, but what are you looking for from him in order for how he's going to affect your organization? A lot of these programs are just trying to put him out there and maximize that rookie contract and go from there, where that's not going to be that key. Thankfully for Texans, they got a guy like CJ Stroud that's a high composure player. He was able to, learn through the system. But I think one of the things also with that point, and if you have a rookie quarterback that's out there talking, one of the phrases I always hear Rick Spielman on With the First Pick talk about is, drinking through a fire hose. And how are you going to lead a guy into the NFL and into play calling and have him be successful? Are you going to throw the full playbook at him right away? Are you going to have him running the most intricate plays within an offense, or are you going to step him through that? I'm obviously, with me being particular to the Packers, I look at Matt LaFleur's offense and I look at how he runs things, and I really respect it. And I think he has a great offensive plan in place. Last year, started the season, Jordan Love's not doing that. He's been with the team for 3 years, and he's still not doing that. He's getting those reps. He's building to that point. Same thing is true with CJ Stroud last year. There's no way, shape, or form that he is going through the offensive playbook and running every single part of that with every intricacy possible. It's a slow build. They're running play actions. They're running pre-snap movement. They're giving him every opportunity to succeed. It might not be the perfect setup for that game, but you're putting your quarterback in a place where he's going to succeed if he has to be out there as a starter. And if you're going to do that, you have to keep that in mind. But like you're saying, I think one of the things you look at, J.J. McCarthy might be in the best situation possible. Obviously, sucks what happened to him, but man, Sam Darnold, he's that Case Keenum. Like, he is that guy. You get to sit behind him for how long? You get to look at this team that is, thank God they found kind of their identity and they're playing well. And a lot of that goes to Sam Darnold. No slack to him whatsoever. He's played amazing this year. But that team as a whole is coming together. JJ McCarthy, hopefully he is acting like the world's biggest sponge and soaking all of that up. Because if you have that opportunity, exactly like you said, you need to take it. And a lot more quarterbacks need to be given that opportunity early on.
So right. I like that Minnesota call out. And okay, so here's a take. The fact that Kirk Cousins did well and that Sam Darnold is doing well, and my fantasy team definitely thanks Sam Darnold for doing well this year. That's going to be a lot of pressure on J.J. McCarthy. A lot, because if two different quarterbacks had success on that team and McCarthy comes in and it's not going to be the same. Right? You can't put McCarthy in the same category as Darnold or Cousins.
No.
Right? Because
I got a question. And this is a little bit off topic, but kind of looking to that point, obviously the Vikings have kind of always been around, and this year that they're, obviously sitting near the top of the division. Do you think there's a world where Sam Darnold's starting quarterback of that team next year?
No.
Okay.
No.
All right.
I think he's going to.
It's a no-win situation for the coaching staff. You're better off getting the comp pick for him than paying top dollar when you know that you want McCarthy to be your guy.
Okay.
But that's me, and there's probably a reason I'm not an NFL GM.
Most people have that opinion. I know I'm in the minority with that.
So I will spin off of that too. I think obviously with them signing Daniel Jones, I think Daniel Jones next year for the Vikings is going to be what Case Keenum was for the Texans and what Marcus Mariota was for the Commanders. I think Darnold's going to walk in free agency. Danny Jones is going to be that bridge guy, and Kevin O'Connell's going to say, okay, JJ, you're now going to need to beat out Daniel Jones and take over this offense.
Yep. And to that point, if McCarthy can't beat out Daniel Jones, there's already a problem. Right? Like we would expect a rookie, right? We would expect like a rookie, even second round pick to be able to probably compete or beat out Daniel Jones.
Absolutely. I look at it through like almost like a Baker Mayfield lens. How many teams, does he go through and it doesn't look good. It doesn't look good. Doesn't look good. Boom. He finds it. It fits. And year 2, it's still working out. That's kind of the lens I approach it through. No slander, obviously, whatsoever to JJ McCarthy. But it's almost like a grass is always greener on the other side approach. But definitely like a topic for another podcast. I totally recognize I got off on a tangent there.
No, that's all right. So, but there's actually a good lens here when we're talking about, I think the Darnold Mayfield discussion is relevant because as we talk about a quick rebuild and we talk about a Daniels versus Stroud, and then we also talk about floor versus ceiling. My opinion of the QB class with Darnold and Mayfield is that you were drafting them for a high floor. You weren't drafting Mayfield because he had the ceiling of a Lamar Jackson or a Josh Allen. I think the scouting reports of that draft class, other than the fact that Josh Rosen, like he's the outlier. Josh Allen had a higher ceiling, but the floor could also bottom out, right? Josh Allen had probably the same kind of variance we would talk about with Anthony Richardson. Right? Like it could go
absolutely.
Same thing with Lamar Jackson. It could have gone a lot of directions. And there was a reason that they weren't the guys that were picked high. Right? And I'm saying that like Josh Allen was picked 7th. But there were, I believe, 3 QBs that were picked. It was at least 2 that were picked ahead of him, if not 3. So, to me, there is something within the DNA of a rebuild that when you're drafting that quarterback, you have to know if you're going for the quarterback floor or the quarterback ceiling. Right? So if you're looking at quarterbacks that are coming out this year and you're listening to a scouting report, understand, are we dealing with a QB because you're drafting him because of his floor, you know what you're getting, or you're drafting him because he can become something that he hasn't shown yet, but we think he can.
No, I'm with you, Jim. I think you hit the nail on the head there. When you look back at that class in 2018, when we talk about Baker and Darnold and Rosen especially, look at the situations that they ended up in. Baker, for example, he ended up in Cleveland. As a Browns fan, I can say this is where quarterbacks go to die, right? He gets a head coach in Hugh Jackson who couldn't coach his way out of a wet paper bag. There's no linear structure there. So that's already the first part. Sam Darnold ends up in New York, same issues. It's the New York Jets. It's the same problems. And then you go to Josh Rosen, same thing, goes to the Arizona Cardinals. They're not sure what they kind of want to do with Rosen. Do they want him to be the guy, not the guy? Then they fire the head coach, and then they go get Kyler Murray in 2019. So you have to have that structure and say, okay, well, when we go into the draft, we have a guy, a bridge guy. We have a Marcus Mariota. We have a Case Keenum. We have a Daniel Jones. We have a guy. If we find a guy that has this ceiling and we find a guy that has these traits and we find a guy, we've done our scouting homework and we identify, we'll use this year's class, for example, we've done our homework and Cam Ward identifies with every single trait and checks every box that we want. If Cam is there when we're on the board, Cam is the guy. If Cam doesn't check every box for us, do we take Cam? No. If Shedeur doesn't check every box for us, do we take Shedeur? No. You don't pigeonhole yourself into a quarterback just to take a quarterback. And that's how your quick rebuild turns into a 4, 5, 10-year rebuild because you're continuously trying to throw quarterbacks at the problem without having that structure in place.
Here, can I like kind of add to this a little bit? Just because, Bill, I'd like to pick your brain for this. I know you posted something on this, and I know the decision was just made regarding Deshaun Watson. You get a situation like that, and so we talk about quick rebuild. So you have a Deshaun Watson, or you have – and Broncos have kind of almost fallen into this category as well with quick rebuild.
Yep.
And they're in a little bit of a similar situation, but the Browns and that contract that Deshaun Watson has – we talk about DNA for a quick rebuild, and obviously this isn't analyzing it, but kind of like a little bit of a teaser looking forward, or how would this apply? What are the thoughts you have for your Cleveland Browns?
Yep. So I agree that the Deshaun Watson contract is a problem. What I would say, and this is coming from a Browns fan, what I would say is Jameis Winston needs to be that Case Keenum, that Marcus Mariota, that guy that bridges you between the two. And if you go into the draft and I think that the head coach and GM are perfectly aligned. Stefanski and Barry are perfectly aligned. And I think we all understand that Watson was a mistake.
Yep.
I understand the signing of it. You saw what he could be on the field in Houston. You were hoping you would get that guy. You didn't. At this point, it's time to reload and rebuild. So you have Jameis as now your bridge guy. So now if you're Stefanski in that scouting department, you say, okay, these are the 5 things that we want. These are the boxes that we need to check, which we won't cover all the boxes. We're going to save that for quarterbacks week on this channel when we talk about what boxes the quarterback needs to check, #quarterbacks week. But we say, okay, we need a quarterback that's going to check all 5 of these boxes. We identify 2, 3, 4 guys that check those boxes. Okay, once we have that, where do we feel he is from a draft capital, from a resource standpoint? Is it a first-round guy? Is it a third-round guy? Is it a fifth-round guy? We don't pigeonhole ourselves into that. In a perfect world, I think what would happen, Browns would use Jameis as the Case Keenum, and they would probably look at a day 3 guy, a couple of guys that I would like. Obviously, Rourke from Indiana is one. I've got my eye on. Tyler Show from Louisville is another one. Drew Aller from Penn State is another one. But getting that guy, and now you say, okay, rookie quarterback, we are going to start you at the 3rd quarterback position or the backup quarterback. Here is the playbook. Learn it, soak it in, be that sponge. If you're ready for that challenge, you now have to beat out Jameis Winston. If he doesn't beat out Jameis Winston in his rookie year, is that a concern? No. If you get 3 years down the line and he beat him out, now is it a coaching concern? So, like Jim had.
Yeah, and I think there's something like we could get into the details of which quarterback or, you bring them in as QB3, but I think like the DNA, one of the things that would be different between the Commanders and the Texans versus the Browns we could probably point to a few other teams is my opinion is you take all your dead cap in a year. You don't spread it out because basically you're saying, okay, we're going to give up 2 years that we don't compete. So like when McDermott came into Buffalo, they had the highest dead cap in NFL history his first season as a coach. They got rid of Sammy Watkins, Marcel Darius, Mario Williams, all had dead cap.
Yep.
And it was like historically high until Russell Wilson in Denver. That was the team that beat Buffalo for the most dead cap.
Hey, until don't forget about Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay.
Right.
$50 million dead cap last year.
Right. But Buffalo's was even higher. Like when they got rid of all those guys. It was like I think we had like 75 or 80 million in dead cap. It was because the next year, and keep in mind, like Buffalo made the playoffs that year. With 80 million in dead cap, we made the playoffs. Right? Now the next year was Josh Allen's rookie year. We didn't make the playoffs, but we were able to sign like a John Brown and a Cole Beasley, right? So we were able to put some pieces around him.
Yeah.
I think.
Absolutely.
One of the things that we also haven't talked about within, let's say, and it probably pivots more to sustaining, so there's probably a reason we haven't talked about it. But here's another take. You have to be able to grow coaches. Okay, and I'm going to use Buffalo as the positive example in that Buffalo has sustained success. Brian Dable left, then Ken Dorsey left, and now we have Joe Brady, and Joe Brady's probably going to be a head coach somewhere next year. Defensively, we had Leslie Frazier. He left. We had McDermott. Then we have Bobby Babich, and Babich is going to be getting head coaching interviews this cycle too. You have to have a culture where you're growing coaches, right? Why does Andy Reid constantly have success? Because he can replace the Eric Bieniemys and the Matt Nagy's of the world when they go to another team. He's growing coaches underneath them.
Yep, absolutely.
And sometimes we may talk about who's calling the plays, but a lot of times it's even just the people that are being brought up. And actually, there was a name I didn't have time to Google it, but Bill, being a Browns fan, you would remember this. So Buffalo had a defensive coach when Schwartz was in Buffalo.
Mm-hmm.
And then that defensive coach ended up he went to Cleveland, then he went to Green Bay. And I can't remember, but like even Jim Schwartz grows the assistant coaches that are underneath him. Right. And that's what I mean. Like Mike something, I think, was this coach's name. He was a defensive coordinator, Buffalo, Cleveland, Green Bay.
You're thinking of Mike Patine.
Yes.
Oh yeah, Mike Patine.
Yeah.
Right. But he grew, I believe, under Schwartz. And you look at even the number of people that grew, like under whether it was Wade Phillips or a lot of these other, let's say, you might say masterminds, the Bill Walsh of the world, the Andy Reid's of the world, that you have to be able to grow your coaches because you're going to need to replace them if you do well. So you have to have a way to do that. And while that's more on the sustaining side, it does go to save with the DNA of Texans and Commanders is that you should be judging the head coaches like Dan Quinn and D'Amico Ryans.
Right.
You need to judge them on their ability to replace a Bobby Slovic, because I think Bobby Slovic is going to get a head coaching job.
Yep.
Right. And the DNA of that coach that you're hiring has to be somebody that knows what it means to grow. And it's not just develop players, but it's even just to grow the talent of the coaching pool around you.
Right.
Absolutely.
And that's exactly why you see teams like the Chicago Bears are in almost a constant state of flux, because their coaches, Eberflus, Mark Trestman, Nagy, they weren't able to grow that coaching staff beneath them. So it just stayed stagnant. And the DNA was, we're here. We don't really know what we're doing. We're just kind of treading water. And that's the hidden fifth step in a quick DNA rebuild is, when is it time to move on and stop treading water and just sink the ship and cut your losses?
Absolutely.
No, we allotted 60 minutes and we were done with that at 45. If you got I was paying attention to the time. I was like, we've been spinning around, not even talking about the Texans or the Commanders for at least 10 minutes.
Right. So I know we wanted to cover Texans and Commanders, but I think there's two teams coming up in this cycle that would probably fit a lot of the things that we've talked about. The first one, the New Orleans Saints. It needs to be a fresh start. They're in a weaker division in the NFC South. I think they could be a team that could turn it around very quickly. Another one, it's less likely to happen, but I think they could do it, is the Tennessee Titans. Even though they already have their young rookie head coach in Brian Callahan, I think this second year they can expedite things if they get the right pieces in place around Levis and determine Levis is the guy, or if Cam Ward or Shadur Sanders checks all those quote-unquote boxes for them and get their guy. So I think those two teams are probably two teams we could be talking about when we come back to this exercise next year.
I'm gonna toss the team out there as well. I think the Oakland Raiders have to be one of those teams. You see Tom Brady stepping in now. Obviously, he's a player. He's not a personnel manager, but he's done the game. I think that franchise itself is, poised for that. I think there's a lot of things that have slowly moved in the right direction. And to one of the points, Bill, the first thing you said, not going to overdraft a quarterback. You have someone in place. They're already doing that. They had Gardner Minshew, AOC. They didn't reach on a quarterback. We didn't see a seventh quarterback, or we didn't see them give up an arm and a leg to move up in the draft this year. I think those things already are allowing them. And I mean, did you look at Brock Bowers now and you say, wow, what a talent that you got. That's more than a tight end right there. I don't care what anyone says. So you look at what you're able to do by building through the draft and that after draft and boom, right there. They're already doing that. And I think that they're going to set themselves up if they can, hopefully find that missing piece. I don't know if Antonio Pierce is the guy that's going to lead the ship. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. But I think there's a lot of things that could kind of move in Oakland's, in Las Vegas's direction. That would be really positive.
Yep. I'm glad that you caught that because I was actually about to ask you if you remembered where you said the Raiders played like 2 minutes before.
Did I say Oakland 2 minutes before?
You did.
Oh man, dang! I mean,
you corrected. You caught yourself the second time.
All right.
That's all good. We'll chop it up in post.
So cool. So I think we could go probably to any team that's picking in the top 10, and we could give so many takes on the rebuilds and like what we think they should do. I like looking at the positive cases because I think like one of the takes that you're going to hear me say a lot, and I think you may have seen me say this in your thread, is linebackers don't get any love. But when we I'm hoping that when we get to the championship week, we can do like what is the DNA of the Final Four NFL teams. And when I've done this before, every single one of them has elite linebacking play.
What are you talking about? Right? The Bears spend $30 million a year on linebackers. They should be in the NFC Championship.
Team, though, are they?
No, they're not.
Right. So
no, I to that point, I totally get that. Yeah, I mean, if you look at those, the value of a linebacker in terms of the play and the athleticism that they can give, it's a little bit devalued. But man, you look between the ears and what they're able to bring. Bobby Wagner, perfect example, like Bill brought up. Like, he's a guy that is going to be able to coordinate that defense and do so many things that help them rise above. So to that point, I think that depending on the guy that you get in there, man, it could be a boom or bust. So Jim, I ultimately do agree with you. I just I like giving some hell with that little piece. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's not often that people agree with me. So Newt, I'm going to tell you right now, you're in the minority. I'm just saying.
And like Jim, you would hit on, and like Newt, you'd hit on with linebacking play. Bobby Wagner, they didn't reset the market.
Yep.
Spending $30 million on a linebacker in that linebacking room is irresponsible because that's $30 million you can't spend to protect your quarterback. It's $30 million you can't spend on your quarterback. $30 million you can't spend to supplement the quarterback. So linebacking play is important, but not resetting the market.
And one of the reasons I want to point that out is that, okay, so the Texans were saying that they did a quick rebuild because they made it to the wild card round of the playoffs. Okay, but they got bounced pretty hard in the wild card round. Right? Like, I'm not saying it was a close game.
Yep.
Right? So we're saying that they did a quick rebuild because they went from the second worst team in the league to a wild card team.
Yep.
Right? That's what we're saying, right? But to get from that wild card team to even just get to the conference championship, there's a level of elite play that's needed. And to Newt's point on the Twitter thread, my opinion is you don't get elite play with average linebackers. You can get elite play with average corners. You can't get elite play with average linebackers. It's a theory. And San Francisco, Kansas City, Baltimore. 3 of the best linebacking rooms in the league were in the Final Four last year. I don't remember who the other NFC team was that was in the Final Four last year.
Detroit.
Okay, and they have Jack Campbell, and they have Brian Branch. So that's elite linebacking play.
Right.
I don't know
with
who
rookie corners.
But
yeah.
Yep.
So but that's a take for another podcast. So like we are walking into our own content.
Absolutely.
Every day. So we are recording this on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. My girlfriend and sons are making pies just over here to my right. So I want to say happy Thanksgiving to everybody. And you're going to be listening to this the day after Thanksgiving. Newt, any final words?
No, nothing that. Oh, I guess here's the thing. I hope you had a good Thanksgiving when you're watching this. I hope you enjoyed the turkey, the stuffing, the mashed potatoes, and the cranberry sauce. And I hope you're enjoying the start of Christmas season. That's all I have.
Hey, Bill, how about you?
Same thing. I want to say thank you, give thanks to you after Thanksgiving for watching this episode. Make sure we would thank you immensely and give even more thanks if you subscribe to the channel. We have daily draft content. We do all sorts of things like this. We do scouting reports on players. There's plenty of more content coming. If you're not following us, make sure you follow us on X. Newt is at NFL Draft _ Weston. I am at Spark Scouting. Jim is that NFL Draft Fanatic. There is no I Am Fanatic, and we would give you even more thanks if you followed us, subscribed, and checked out all the content. Jim, I'll turn it back over to you to wrap us up and send us home.
Let me do
Happy
one more thing.
Thanksgiving, everybody.
Let me do one more thing. Jim, thank you for bringing all of us together. You put it at the beginning of the pod, but we are super thankful for you for bringing us together. We really appreciate it. I'll speak for everyone.
Thank you.
Seriously.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
That makes me happy. Thank you for saying that. I can't do this without you. So I think we're all thankful for each other. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Thank you for watching this episode of Mrs. R Relevant. I would like to remind you of our schedule. On Mondays, we have running backs and linebackers. Tuesdays, we have tight ends. Tuesdays, we'll also have defensive backs. Wednesdays, we have offensive tackle and edge. Thursdays, we have interior offensive line and defensive tackles. And on Friday, we close out with wide receivers and corners. There will be additional episodes on edge and offensive line that are scattered throughout the week. Please like the NFL Draft Fanatics Twitter and X page at NFL Draft Fanatic, no I Am Fanatic, to stay up to date on every episode. Thank you very much for watching the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast.